We're just days away from the legislative session, and Republicans and Democrats in Santa Fe are trying to agree on Real ID. Former Secretary of State Diana Duran being sent to jail on embezzlement charges sparked calls for reform. We'll also talk about economic development and the Spaceport. This is New Mexico Now. Welcome to New Mexico Now. I'm Anthony Moreno. Today we focus on the upcoming legislative session and some of the issues facing the state. Joining us now is Walt Rubel, editorial page editor of the Las Cruces Sun News, Lauren Villagran, staff writer from the Albuquerque Journal, and Heath Haussamen from nmpolitics.net. Well, let's get started. We know the top issue is always to pass the budget during the session. However, right now, Republicans and Democrats are trying to come up with an agreement to bring the state driver's licenses compliant with the Real ID Act. In the meantime, New Mexicans are seeing the impact. Just this week, White Sands Missile Range announced that they would no longer allow civilians access to the range with a state ID. They must show an alternative approved ID. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, recently announced that on January 22, 2018, commercial air travelers with driver's licenses that don't meet the Real ID Act have to show an alternative ID that does. The department says that they will kick off educational efforts in the meantime to make people aware. Both parties in New Mexico are blaming one another for the state not being compliant with Real ID. New Mexico House Minority Leader Brian Egolf said the governor is playing political football, while a spokesperson for Governor Martinez says that the Democrats have, quote, ignored this problem for far too long. So as this legislative session gets underway, we have a lot of blame going around for getting this far. What's the real hope that we're actually going to have an agreement during this session?
Well, I think it's important to note that the reason that we're not compliant is because in 2003 we passed legislation to allow people in the country, immigrants in the country illegally, to get a state driver's license. And that came before the federal law was passed. And so that has been the sticking point ever from the start. I mean, Democrats have had the position that people need to be able to get to work, they need to be able to take their children to school, to take an elderly parent to the doctor, things like that. The governor has had a position that this endangers the state. She uses the word a dangerous bill repeatedly when she talks about this. And I think thus far there has been a perception that the federal government really wasn't going to act. And so that sort of gave everybody space that they could take those absolutist positions. Now that is clear that that's no longer the case, you would hope that it would spark negotiations, and it already has. I mean, the Republicans in the House have already come out with a proposal for the first time that would allow for a two-tiered license. And so the negotiations have at least started. The ball is rolling. I'm hopeful that something gets done.
There are some pretty significant sticky points. The Republican proposal for the second tier license still places pretty strict requirements on who can get a license if they're not here legally. And we don't know exact numbers. We don't even know how many people without legal status have New Mexico driver's licenses, but it's fair to say that under the Republican proposal, a significant number of them would lose driver's licenses that they currently have. Republicans, at least some Republicans, seem to want to do that. Democrats don't want to do that. The Democrats' proposal would probably also take away some current licenses from people who have them. So we've gone from everybody's going to lose their licenses who's not here legally on the Republican side to nobody, the Democrats not wanting to take them away from anybody, to arguing about how many people are going to lose licenses. And yeah, in the meantime, Sandia Labs and White Sands Missile Range are not taking New Mexico licenses. Any of the other military bases, Los Alamos Labs could join them in the meantime. And then there's this looming date in 2018 when we may not be able to board airplanes with a New Mexico driver's license if we don't resolve this.
It sounds like there's going to be a lot of give and take from both sides in order to reach an agreement. Senator Mary Kay Papen recently told KRWG that this last week. So what are the things that the parties are going to stand firm on and not give?
Well, just going over what the Republicans' proposal is real quickly. Heath touched on a lot of this, but I think the big thing is that you would have to prove that you have resided in the state for at least 2 years. And so that's what Heath is mentioning, is that a lot of people who now have licenses wouldn't be able to meet that requirement. So that seems to be one of the big sticking points. The Senate bill that they passed last year, and I assume that they're going to come back with the same bill, is a little bit interesting in that it would give people an option. If you decided that you didn't want the federal government having all that information about you and you didn't want to jump through all the hoops, their bill would allow you to still get a non-compliant license like you can now. The governor is saying that would still keep us non-compliant with the federal government. That doesn't seem right to me. I would think that people who wanted to have the ID would still have it.
It's interesting because nationwide, this is a debate that's happening in other states. The compliance issue with Real ID in New Mexico is a real issue. New Jersey is looking at a way to get unauthorized immigrants a driver's permit card or a driver's license. California recently, last year I believe, passed something that will allow unauthorized immigrants to obtain driver's licenses. And this debate has happened in a variety of states. About a dozen states have followed New Mexico and do provide either a full license or some sort of driver's permit card. Illinois has a two-tiered system. So while New Mexico looks to roll back that 2003 law, there are other states that are actually following us.
And it's interesting that this doesn't necessarily follow along Republican and Democratic lines. The Republicans are saying their two-tier proposal matches states around us. Colorado and Utah both have a two-tier licensure system. Interestingly, Utah's is almost, you could argue, more liberal in that it has pretty light requirements. Pretty much anybody who's there without legal status in Utah can get a card to drive legally, where Colorado has requirements that are more like the 2-year residency or you filed a tax return in the state, things that most immigrants without legal status don't tend to do. And so the Republicans here want to do what Colorado's looks like, which is right now a Democratic state, and the Democrats are pushing something that looks more like what Utah has.
Lauren, I want to ask you something. We just have about a minute left on this topic, but one of the things people think about a lot is, you have to always show ID, proper ID to get across the border. Well, here in New Mexico, we have the inland border checkpoints. How is that going to be impacted?
Well, I spoke with a spokesman from the Border Patrol who said that generally, and for those of us who cross through those checkpoints on a daily or monthly basis, we don't have to show a driver's license. They typically just ask citizenship. If you get sent to secondary and you are asked to prove legal status, the spokesman said that a driver's license was never proof, that it would require a birth certificate or a passport or something. So for the checkpoints, nothing really changes.
And I know we want to go, but I want to make one point real quick on the federal government, because I think what happened Monday at Wismar should not have happened. I mean, the folks at Wismar have been telling us all along that a driver's license would be sufficient. Now, they also told us that was subject to change, but that change should not have happened on the Monday morning that this thing took place. And I think the fact that the Army sent down one set of regulations, the Air Force sent down another, so that you could get into Haussamen with your driver's license, but you can't get into Wismar. And that just really suggests that they didn't have their ducks in a row on this.
I did have a sense last week in trying to figure out how to report on this, and there were instances where the Albuquerque Journal and the Associated Press were reporting different facts about things, that there was a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiation going on between Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and in some ways the New Mexico officials who thought the feds are never going to enforce this and we can just keep kicking this can down the road, there was reason that they suspected that.
All right, we got to move on. The calls for campaign finance and ethics reform are nothing new to the state, but when former Secretary of State Diana Duran resigned and pleaded guilty and was sentenced on embezzlement charges, there was a renewed spark for change from business as usual in New Mexico politics. So as we keep moving on, Heath wrote a commentary about this, looking into when the person, you said something about when the person who's in charge of campaign finance reform goes to jail, it's hard to not think that the ethics and campaign finance rules are a joke.
They are a joke in New Mexico, and our officials have kept it that way for a long time. They pass reforms that are incremental and have gigantic loopholes in response to scandals. We've watched this for a decade, and I have little reason to believe it'll be any different this time. We'll probably pass a few things in this session, and everybody will find the loopholes that were probably intentionally written into them very quickly, and they're incremental steps forward, but it's progress, but it's very little progress.
Oh, Walt, I know you've covered this quite a bit, but I mean, the way things are set up, I mean, it was brought to light that the Secretary of State State's office was not really going after folks that they should have been.
Yeah, the Farmington Daily Times did a report on this, and they found, I forget what the exact number, but just a tiny percentage of the people who actually had been assessed fines by the Secretary of State's office were required to pay those fines. And so it really was a toothless enforcement, and it was an enforcement that was primarily done by your campaign opponents, because the Secretary of State's office itself wasn't looking into trying to find discrepancies. We saw here in Las Cruces 3 years ago where Lee Cotter, the opponent for Mary Jane Garcia, found discrepancies in her report. That was brought out right before the election, and Mary Jane was defeated. But that's not how it should work. I mean, it should be people, impartial people, pouring through those documents, not your campaign opponent.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, the way things are set up right now, is it pretty much the discretion? I mean, can the Secretary of State choose who they really want to go after?
Yes, they can. I mean, they have enormous discretion. And ironically, they were meeting and trying to toughen that up and trying to change that at the time that the arrest came down. So I think that work is continuing.
Well, I know a lot of, recently, I mean, it hasn't been that long ago where you could access online information about who's giving what to the candidates. I mean, even that was said to have, kind of some struggle. And I guess some of the, a lot of excuses are New Mexico being a poor state and also a very rural state is having trouble with the, technical difficulties and access to folks to be able to submit those things.
One of the ways that corruption happens in New Mexico is that we do it in the light of day. We have one of the stronger Inspection of Public Records Act laws in the country, for example. We have access to public records, but then nobody's watching it, nobody's enforcing it. We have these campaign finance laws, but the Secretary of State both lacked the will to enforce them, partly because she was breaking them, I'm sure, also lacks the staff to thoroughly investigate them, and then the laws are written in such a way that how to do that isn't clear. It's the same with the state auditor's office, which needs more resources than it has to really keep up on how New Mexico taxpayer money is being spent, and gets cuts instead.
When you say resources, you're talking money.
I'm talking money. Yeah, we don't put money into enforcing the laws we have. We have weak laws, but even the laws we have, we don't put the money into enforcing them.
Well, is that actually, what's the potential of this actually being addressed? I mean, I'm sure there's lawmakers on both sides of the aisle that aren't really going to spend a lot of time pushing this forward.
Well, the one bill I'm going to keep an eye on this session is trying to get an ethics commission set up. This is something that some people in the legislature, like Heath said, have been working on for a decade or longer. I'm not confident, but
you mean independent?
Yeah, that's right. It would be an independent commission that would have some sort of authority. I don't know if that would include subpoena power, probably not, but at least you had somebody that you could go to make a complaint that you would have some confidence would give you an impartial look into whatever it was you were complaining about.
I see. Now, obviously there's the other factor. I mean, as a reporter and journalist, you're aware that there aren't too many folks who are able to really dig in to see where the money's going and how to find it. I mean, especially in Santa Fe, I guess, if you compare to how maybe it was looking 10 years ago.
The discrepancies on Diana Duran's campaign finance reports that led to discovering the crime she was committing have been in the public record since 2010. None of us, no one in the press, no one in the public, the Secretary of State's audit, anybody who could have looked into it didn't, or those discrepancies would have been discovered sooner. They're out there to find in others' reports, I'm sure.
Well, one thing that also I think, getting back to the finance reform thing is also, what about mandatory fees? I mean, the Attorney General has talked about that, and is there a real sense that could actually happen and make an impact?
Mandatory fees,
whether regarding campaign finance reform.
Right. Yes, I think it could make an impact, and no, I don't think it will happen, because there is an attitude up there that we are all just humble citizen legislators. We don't have big staffs that can help us prepare this stuff.
Or paid.
Or paid staffs, that's right. And so we're going to make mistakes because, I'm not an accountant, or I'm not a politician by trade. I'm a plumber or whatever else. And I'm doing the best I can, but if I make them, so they are very loath to put anything in there that would have actual teeth where they themselves could end up paying a penalty or some way be held accountable.
We have under a minute left. I'm sorry.
It was very common when we were talking about, the state has a ban on gifts, for example, now I think it's over $250. It's a pretty weak law. But when we were debating it, it was pretty common to hear on the floor of the House or Senate, you don't pay us, and now you want to take away, somebody would pick up the teddy bear that had been left there, or the electric toothbrush, or whatever gift lobbyists had put on their desk that day. It's not fair that you take these things away from us too when you don't pay us. And they're not exactly wrong. We're the only state that doesn't pay our legislators, and the fact that they don't get paid does give them a sense that they're entitled to other things, which is one of the arguments for paying them. So you take away that sense of entitlement.
All right, well, we got to move on. I have a feeling we will be talking about that again in the future the next time we meet. Well, Real ID and a push for different types of reforms are much of the talk these days, but economic development in one of the poorest states in the country is needed, and both parties, they have their own ways to approach that. Let's start with a major booming area in our backyard, the border. Lauren, you spent a lot of time in Santa Teresa covering that. What are some of the things that you expect them to be lobbying, or the folks down here who are representing them to put forth in Santa Fe?
Well, I know the Border Industrial Association is going to be pushing a move to get about $350,000 from the legislature to partially fund additional northbound checks at the border. So that means that trucks coming out of the Juarez factory industry, the maquila industry, would be able to come over our border after 8 p.m. Right now, Santa Teresa Port of Entry closes at 8 p.m. Since we compete with El Paso, that's unacceptable for the industry players down there, because essentially there's just not enough time to get trucks through. New Mexico saw its trade numbers grow pretty substantially between 2013 and 2014, and they're probably poised to grow again when we get the 2015 numbers. I think trade to Mexico specifically was $1.55 billion. Dell Computer, which manufactures in San Jeronimo just over the border, is already paying for additional southbound checks through midnight, I believe. And so basically the Border Industrial Association wants to see those northbound checks. That would increase our trade numbers. It could be a real boon for that part of the country. I know that's what they're asking for. The northbound checks, though, will cost up almost $1 million, about $900,000, because it requires additional staffing. Basically what happened is that the federal government opened a program in which states or private entities can actually pay for staffing at ports of entry. New Mexico offered this during the Richardson administration, but the federal government didn't have a program at that time. Now El Paso, the city of El Paso, is actually paying for staffing at its ports of entry. So the question is New Mexico prepared to do something similar?
So it sounds like the state in general was prepared for this a long time ago. Now they're trying to play catch up, and folks like El Paso in Texas are jumping right ahead.
That's correct. That's correct. So with Santa Teresa's limited hours, maquilas tend to send their merchandise through El Paso so as not to get caught at the border, because you never can tell how long a check is going to take. They don't want to get stuck. A lot of these corporations are working on just-in-time delivery. There's something else going on down there in which there will be customs inspections inside the Foxconn plant, where Dell produces computers on the other side of the border. So that also should change things in terms of commerce.
Now, the Republicans have their answer to attracting businesses to New Mexico, and that is putting a right-to-work law in effect. That is a big push. They've been saying that for years, and of course unions have been pushing back, saying this is a union-busting law that people think. How much of an impact does that really have on a place like New Mexico, where unions may not be as prevalent?
I think it's not much. Republicans talk about this like it's a silver bullet. Democrats push back, say the Republicans are trying to destroy unions in New Mexico. I think about 7% of workers in New Mexico are members of unions. In Wisconsin, when they debated right to work, I think it was like 30%. Much more significant there. This is a change that both sides can argue is a good policy change or a bad one, and it may make a little difference, but anyone who talks about it like this is going to fix our economy or destroy our economy, they're not only wrong, they're not being truthful. It's just the numbers don't point in that direction.
Is this really about money, though? I mean, when you get down to it, we're talking about the ability for people to bargain and collective bargain? And is this just really about taking monies away from unions possibly?
Well, certainly opponents of this would say that. They would argue that if you look in right-to-work stage, that wages are depressed in those states. Opponents or supporters of right-to-work would offer the argument that it provides more job opportunities. Certainly we've seen in New Mexico where our unemployment rate has lagged behind other states, and we haven't recovered at the same rate as our neighbors have in Colorado and Texas and Arizona. And so I think Heath is right, but I think philosophically, even though it may not make a huge difference realistically, I think philosophically there is a feeling that this would send a message that we are more business friendly, or that it would help recruiters, even though it wouldn't have a significant impact on the bottom line. It would help our message be better as we're going out looking for companies to move here.
All right, well, we got to move on to our next topic. Another possible economic boom for the state was thought to be in commercial space flight. Well, taxpayers spent over $218 million to build Spaceport America. Executive Director of Spaceport America, Christine Anderson, recently told the Las Cruces Sun News that they believe Virgin Galactic will be flying in by the 2018 fiscal year. Anderson also announced that the Spaceport plans on asking for $2.8 million from the state legislature this year. I mean, trying to get going on this, it's like Anderson also kind of mentioned something. Well, when you compare that nearly $3 million request to the amount of money taxpayers already have invested in this, it's really not that much. Well, I mean, are we already just in too deep to really go back or look at other options here, like selling to a private industry?
Well, there was legislation introduced last year to sell it by Senator Munoz. My sense is there aren't a whole lot of people lining up to buy it. We invested, I think, $218 million, something like that. I doubt if there's anybody out there ready to write a $218 million check and take this off our hands. Beyond that, I really do think that there was a tragic accident on October 2014 where Virgin Galactic really was in the last stages of testing and development, and they had a crash, and their co-pilot died in that crash, and it has set them back dramatically. I hope Christine's right. I hope that they are flying in 2018, but I'm not counting on it. And they shouldn't be either. And I don't think they are. They are actively going out and trying to diversify and trying to bring new tenants in there. And that is going to be their salvation, if there is salvation to be had, I think.
I think it's a matter of voter patience at this point, in part because, again, like you said, Virgin was on a trajectory. They have been set back. Virgin intends to roll out its new Spaceship 2 at the end of February, but that will only be the beginning of the ground and then air testing process. I'm not sure, based on the way they were testing previously, that 2018 is a valid date. I'm not sure if Christine Anderson took that directly from Virgin or where that came from. Regardless, Spaceport is trying to diversify, like Walt said. They have a new master plan. They want to recruit additional businesses, be it ground station satellites, different kind of rocket testing. That being said, that's going to take some time to come to fruition should other companies choose to locate here. And in the meantime, basically Spaceport Authority is asking the legislature to partially fund its operations until those new businesses come online, if they do. I believe that Christine Anderson has called this fiscal 2017 sort of a bridge year. Because in 2018, if I'm correct, Virgin Galactic will be paying $3 million lease correct. Or rent, whereas currently it's $1 million. So there are additional revenue sources coming in the future, but could take a while.
So I mean, should taxpayers have a little more faith in the Plan B right now than?
I grew up in New Mexico. I'm a native New Mexican. We're a state that gave away Bill Gates, who invented a computer in a garage in Albuquerque. I'm raising my daughter here. I want to see this thing work. I mean, as just a New Mexican, I want the spaceport to work. I want to be patient with it. I also look at some of these things now like we're developing a business plan. We didn't have a business plan before. We didn't have a valid business plan before. The Richardson administration didn't really develop one. Martinez came in thinking she was going to close this thing down, and then a year or two later changed her mind, and now she's on board, but that slowed the process down. New Mexico actually dreamed big with the spaceport for once, but we have done a pretty poor job of executing that, I think. And I don't know. I mean, it's a question for voters. How long will you tolerate us trying to make this work? And frankly, I'm glad that if Virgin Galactic's spaceship was going to crash, it did it then rather than when it had a bunch of paying customers on it and took off from New Mexico. You know, that's the process is working itself out. But I think it's an open-ended question, the one you're asking, but it's the right question, which is how long are we going to be patient with this?
But part of the issue is that the spaceport is actually just currently primarily a terminal for Virgin Galactic. So that's not a facility that can be used by any other company at this point. The runway is available for use from other companies. There's a ton of land out there that other companies could develop. But unlike the Mojave Spaceport in California, which is set up the way an airport is, to have various companies flying, testing, manufacturing, the Spaceport America is essentially a beautiful terminal facility that belongs under the current lease to Virgin Galactic. So all of our eggs currently are in one basket, although Spaceport Authority is trying to do something more with the facilities they do have out there.
But we are at the edge of our patience. They asked for $4 million to build another hangar, and the legislature said that's across the line. We're not going to do that. So.
All right, unfortunately, we are out of time. Special thanks to Walt Rubel from the Las Cruces Sun News, Lauren Villagran from the Albuquerque Journal, and Heath Haussamen from nmpolitics.net. Thank you for joining us for another episode of New Mexico Now. You can always keep up with this program and others here on KRWG by liking us on Facebook and following us on Twitter. Also, if you have a question or comment on the program or story ideas for future shows, email us at feedback@nmsu.edu. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.